Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going deep on someone who has lived quite a life in front of the cameras and behind the scenes, Vanessa Trump. And, the listener wants to get away from the tabloid headlines, and I think they'll be really fascinated by what we found in these sources. It's like her story has all these different chapters, New York City modeling the Trump family, and now, like, whatever this next phase is.
Yeah, you're totally right. Distinct chapters for sure. And the interesting thing is how those chapters might be connected. Like, take her upbringing, for instance. We know she grew up on Manhattan's Upper East Side, went to a private school, the whole 9 yards. She was also a pretty successful model for a while, working with big agencies like Wilhelmina. So, maybe she was already used to a certain amount of attention, maybe even pressure before she ever got involved with the Trumps.
That's a great point. It really makes you wonder if that early experience, like dealing with the competition and the constant scrutiny in modeling, if that like prepared her for what came later.
Hmm.
And she was even linked to Leonardo DiCaprio back in the 90s. Could you imagine going from DiCaprio to Donald Trump Jr.? That's
Oh,
something else.
it really is. And
Yeah.
don't forget, she even had a small part in that movie. Something's got to give. So she wasn't just a pretty face. She was trying to make her own way. But then in 2003, she meets Don Jr. at a fashion show. Talk about a sliding doors moment. Like, who knows what would happen if she hadn't gone to that show?
Oh, that is so true. It's wild to think about how these chance encounters can change everything.
Yeah.
One meeting and her whole life takes a completely different path. They get married at Mar-a-Lago in 2005, and bam, she's officially a Trump. 5 kids later, and she's
Okay.
fully in that world. The business, the politics, the media attention, it never stops.
And we can't forget, this wasn't just any family she married into. The Trumps, even back then, they were famous for being larger than life, always in the tabloids. The pressure and expectations on her, wow, must have been huge. It's easy to forget that when you're on the outside looking in.
Totally. You're right. It wasn't just being in any high-profile family. It was the Trumps. That name comes with, a lot of baggage, both good and bad. It's hard to imagine what that must have been like, especially with a family to think about.
And that's where, her resilience, that thing we talked about earlier that might come in, just think the constant media scrutiny, the pressure to fit a certain image, the family dynamics, it's a lot to deal with even for someone who'd already been in the spotlight.
Man, you're painting a pretty intense picture here. It makes you think, how much did her early life, the Upper East Side thing and the modeling, did that help her handle it all? Or was it more of a burden? Maybe both. What do you think?
It's a good question. On one hand, her background might have given her the tools to deal with a world of, social stuff and public image. But on the other hand, that same background maybe made the change even harder. Think about going from being a model where you have some freedom to the very structured and watched life in the Trump family.
That's such a good point. It wasn't just a change in how she lived. It was a shift in like who had the power, what people expected of her, maybe even her own identity. And all of this is happening while the whole world's watching the media, picking apart every little thing. No wonder their marriage fell apart under all that pressure.
Yeah.
And it fall apart it did. The 2018 divorce, that was big news. Of course, officially it was like irreconcilable differences, but the tabloids went crazy with all these rumors about Don Jr. and Aubrey O'Day from Celebrity Apprentice. You have to wonder what all that attention does to you, especially when you're going through a divorce.
Oh, yeah. It's like a whole other level of stress most people couldn't even imagine. And remember, she's got 5 kids to think about. The sources don't get into the details of the divorce much, but you can kind of read between the lines. There's a strength there, like she's really trying to protect her kids from all the craziness. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and speaking of crazy, there's that whole white powder letter thing. It was just a few months after the divorce announcement, and she gets this envelope with white powder in it. They rush her to the hospital. Everybody's freaking out, and then it turns out to be harmless cornstarch. But still, that must have been so scary.
Oh, absolutely. Even though it was a hoax, that kind of thing is terrifying. Imagine the fear not knowing, especially with everything else going on. It really shows how vulnerable you are when you're in the public eye, even if you're trying to step back.
It's like she couldn't get away from the spotlight even when she was trying to build a more private life for herself and her kids. So what happens next? We've talked about New York modeling the Trumps, the divorce, the scary letter. What's this next phase you mentioned? What does that look like for Vanessa?
Well, from what we can tell from the sources, it seems like she's chosen to be really quiet. You see little things here and there, like a birthday post on Instagram, rumors about who she's dating, but for the most part, she's stayed out of the public eye.
It's kind of interesting, right? After all that time being so visible, it seems like she's really trying to have a more normal life, more focused on family and, personal growth. It makes you wonder if she's found some peace, maybe some control that she didn't have before.
I think that's definitely possible. Think about the difference. Before, her life was controlled by all these outside forces, the modeling industry, the Trump family, the media. Now she seems to be making her own choices, setting her own limits.
That's a huge shift, and it makes me think about resilience in a different way. We usually think of resilience as like overcoming tough times, bouncing back.
Yeah,
But maybe there's another kind of resilience, like the resilience of walking away from something that's not working for you, even if it means giving up some status or attention.
that's a really interesting point. And it's something everyone can relate to, whether you're famous or not. Sometimes resilience means saying no, putting yourself first, even if it's not what people expect you to do.
So if we're seeing Vanessa's story as this journey of resilience, how does this quiet phase fit in? Is it like a retreat, a time to regroup, or something totally different? What do you think?
It's hard to say for sure, but I don't think it's just a retreat. I think it's her consciously choosing to redefine what success and happiness mean for her. She's experienced fame, fortune, and all that comes with it. Now it seems like she's looking for something deeper, something more real.
Yeah, and maybe that's what's so inspiring about her story. It's like she's saying, look, I've played these parts, I've lived in that world, and now I'm choosing something else. It really makes you think about what it means to make it.
Mm.
Maybe success isn't always about being famous or the next big thing. Maybe it's more about having the guts to create a life that feels right for you, even if it's not what everyone expects.
That's a really good way to put it. And it's a lesson for all of us. We get so caught up in those external signs of success, the job titles, the followers on social media, all the stuff. But Vanessa's story reminds us that real happiness usually comes from inside, from making choices that match your values.
It's like she's redefined what being resilient means. She's not just bouncing back, she's like changing and growing.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder what's next for her. I mean, what does this next chapter look like? Will she stay on this path of quiet reinvention, or will she find a new way to use her experiences, her platform to make a difference?
That's a great question. And to be honest, I don't know. But that's what makes it so interesting. We've looked at her past, we've talked about the present, and now we can imagine what the future might hold. What's she passionate about? What causes might she get behind? What kind of impact she have on the world, but on her own terms?
Yeah, those are questions only she can answer.
Hmm.
But I think her story gives us some hints. We've seen her handle those complicated social circles, deal with all the media attention, raise a big family, and go through some really tough personal stuff.
Yeah.
She's obviously a strong woman, resilient and resourceful.
And don't forget her compassion. You remember when she spoke out against cyberbullying after her son was targeted online? It showed a different side of her. She was willing to use her voice to protect someone else.
Oh, that's right. I had almost forgotten about that. It just shows there's so much more to her than what you see in the headlines and the public image. She's a mother, an advocate, a person trying to figure things out just like all of us.
And maybe that's the biggest thing we can take away from this whole deep dive today. We tend to put famous people on a pedestal or in these little boxes, and we forget that they're real people with their own hopes, fears, and dreams. Vanessa's story reminds us to look deeper to see the humanity in everyone, no matter what their name is or how famous they are.
Well said. And leaves us with a lot to think about, right? What does being resilient mean to you? How do we define success and happiness? And how can we use our own experiences, our own voices, to make the world a better place, even in small ways?
Those are really good questions to ask ourselves. And who knows, maybe Vanessa Trump's next chapter will give us even more to think about on those very topics.
Well, I'll definitely be watching, that's for sure. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been a fascinating look at a life that is anything but ordinary. Until next time, keep diving deep, keep asking questions, and keep looking for those hidden gems of wisdom in the stories all around us.